All right, guys, thank you so much for coming back to the channel. I'm really excited about my guest today. I have a love for him because he has this awesome product called Keto Brick. If you haven't heard of it, I'll put a link below this video, but it was very instrumental in helping my daughter transition over to keto just a few months ago. She loves it. It's been very helpful, but beside that, Robert has been keto for what, like 6 years with no
Yeah.
carb refeeds?
I'm pretty sure it's been about 6 years. It's definitely been 5, but I'm pretty sure it's coming up on 6 now. Yeah, no carb refeeds at all during that period.
And you've used a ketogenic diet lifestyle to get in shape for these bodybuilding competitions. So, there's this big myth of you can't build muscle and you can't do what you've done with keto. So I love this conversation for that as well.
Yeah, I'm all about breaking down the myths and proving people wrong. So we can dive deep into that topic for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you coach people as well. So you work one-on-one with people, you get feedback from people about what works and what doesn't work also.
Yeah, that's been hugely instrumental for me in kind of developing my protocol, so to speak, because I don't just work with competitors and I don't just work with males that meet a certain criteria. Like my client pool is a pretty broad demographic, so I've been able to try and see how different manipulations affect different individuals, and it's interesting because I can kind of pick up on certain pattern recognition and see how the majority of people are affected, and I've honed in on it pretty good, I feel.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so important, as someone who's watching this channel, people I think like me because I'm like, look, I'm just a person. I don't have any letters behind my name. I'm probably going to keep it that way. I'm just going to share with you guys what works for me. And then as someone, I respect people like yourself who coach people, and then you actually listen to your clients and you create and adapt based on that feedback. I think that anybody watching, these are people that we can really trust and listen to, that they really work one-on-one with people. They aren't just picking studies and saying, let's do this based on this study and that's what's going to work for everyone.
Yeah, I definitely don't have a PhD behind my name either, but I definitely think that I'm a practitioner of what I preach, and I've proven the principle just with myself, but also with hundreds of clients. And I feel like that adds a lot of credibility to the table for sure.
Awesome. Well, here's what I really want to talk about. Something that I'm interested in, that a lot of people that watch my channel right now are interested in, is just this whole concept of metabolism when it comes to keto, carnivore. This conversation probably, as we talked about before we turn the camera on, isn't going to be for somebody who's been in a calorie surplus for many years, who's, morbidly obese. This is more for people who are looking to, maybe lose that last 15, 20 pounds, that have been chronically dieting for years and years. And now they've come to keto and carnivore. So I want to talk about metabolism for those people. And a lot of people, and I've made the mistake of saying it before, damaged metabolism. Now I'm trying to reframe that as like a down-regulated metabolism. But for all the dieting that you've done for shows, I want to talk a little bit about how keto has played into that and helped you keep a healthy metabolism. And would you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think as far as metabolism relates to the ketogenic diet, I'm able to just hone in on it more. I can have a better pulse on how my body's responding to the different caloric intakes I'm consuming and the different macronutrient ratios I'm manipulating. When you're adding in a bunch of carbohydrates to the mix, you're going to get some swings and upticks in blood glucose, some dips in blood ketones. It's just going to kind of skew the data. Whereas with a strict ketogenic or carnivore approach, I'm able to really hone in on how my body's responding specifically to the caloric intake and the macronutrient ratios. So that's been hugely advantageous for me to play around with and kind of really experiment with. As far as metabolism as a whole goes, it's funny because there's a lot of like misconceptions about how it works, and there's a lot of descriptive words that are not really optimal words, like speed up metabolism, slow down, damage metabolism. I don't think those really paint the right picture, but upregulate or downregulate, I feel like that's a pretty fair assessment of what's happening here. And you can, it's a lot more nuanced in this. It's not the human body's in the closed loop system, but when you look at metabolism, it's kind of similar to a furnace. If you're adding in more firewood to a furnace, it's going to upregulate the heat and the energy produced from that increase in fuel. And it's a similar concept that's happening in our human body. as you increase or decrease your caloric intake and fuel uptake. So it's a very important part of the equation here. And I feel like so many people are chronically under eating and down regulating their metabolism, which is totally fine in an acute situation, but chronically under eating and chronically down regulating that metabolism is going to really screw them up long term.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the background I came from. And then jumping into carnivore, what I ended up doing was a ton of fasting. I was trying to eat in a deficit and do a bunch of fasting. And I basically just, everything kind of crapped out on me at the beginning of this year. So what I ended up doing, just kind of a little bit more intuitively, was eating in a surplus for about 6 months, and sticking really strictly to a 90% fat, 10% protein, just really getting in those ketogenic macros within a carnivore diet. And now that I've done that for 6 months and I've confirmed that I've ovulated 6 times in a row, because I had totally lost my cycle. It was just non-existent. And everyone's like, well, you're 41, you're going into menopause. And I was like, I still think that's too young. I still think that's, I mean, we're pathologizing something because it's happening, but I don't think it's normal. So from there, now I'm like, okay, now I can start, putting myself more so in a deficit, and it actually works. It doesn't have to be a severe deficit, but I see this happening a lot in keto and carnivore, especially. Fasting is like super, super trendy. And then I see people freaking out that they're gaining weight like really quickly, really easily. Can we talk a little bit about your thoughts on this trend?
Yeah, fasting is great. I mean, it's a great tool. It can be leveraged for sure, but you don't want to have too many stressors on the body all at once. And fasting is a stressor on the body, and being in a caloric deficit is a stressor on the body. So I like to recommend people do one or the other. It's not really a wise move to do both. If you're going to be in a caloric deficit and like cut for a competition or just the summer or whatever, you don't want to throw in a bunch of extended fasting on top of it as well. Like if you're doing a 24-hour OMAD approach, that's totally fine. But when you start getting into the multi-day fasts in the context of also being in a caloric deficit, you're going to be doing yourself more harm than good. And with regard to losing your cycle, having amenorrhea, something like that, you see a lot of females in the keto carnivore space losing their cycle, and they don't look to add more calories because they haven't yet reached a goal weight or a certain composition. They look to carbs because carbs are given this halo effect for resetting your cycle and improving your hormonal function. But that's just putting a Band-Aid over the underlying issue, which is that you're under eating. If you don't need the carbs, there's no reason the female needs to have the carbs. They give into those cravings, and they may see a slight improvement in their cycle, but it's just a temporary fix. If they actually just increase the overall calories and allow their hormones and metabolism to reset at a better, healthier baseline, then they don't need the carbs at all.
Yeah, that seems to be kind of a trendy thing that's happening right now. And I see it a lot with women. Women will try to do keto and try to do carnivore, and they do lose their cycle. A lot of times they are eating in a deficit. And then I also see people, not necessarily in a deficit, but they're listening to, and I heard a video you did on this recently, they're eating super high protein and a lower amount of fat because there's this big, I want to like slam my head into the wall every time I hear somebody say, if you want to lose fat on carnivore, just eat less fat, just eat high protein, like the Ted Diamond deal. Everyone's all obsessed with this PE thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys, would you talk about that a little bit?
So we can go super deep on this topic, but this is definitely one of my frustrations in the space. And it's a frustrating thing because it makes a lot of intuitive sense. Like if you're hearing this, I've got body fat to lose, I'm just going to eat less plate fat, less dietary fat, and then my body's going to tap into that stored fat and I'll be good, which sounds really sensible. Like that makes a lot of sense. However, it's not as simple as that. I mean, if calories are equated for, like if you're taking out a lot of plate fats and everything else is held constant, then yeah, you're going to be dropping calories, and you're seeing some of that drop in body fat from that drop in calories. However, if you were to leave calories constant across the board and have, one test group that has a higher fat version and one test group that has a higher protein version, there's a lot more to it than just a simple thermic effect of food that more protein brings to the table. If you have higher fat and you're fat adapted, deeply fat adapted, you're going to have better energy and your body's going to become more efficient at actually using fat. including your stored fat. So I'm never really advocating very minimal dietary fat and very high protein. I've always operated better, and my clients have as well, with a higher fat version of keto. Now, that's not to say you don't want to have enough protein. Having adequate protein is very, very important. And I see a lot of people in the keto space getting fearful of having too much protein for fear of gluconeogenesis, and they just get to this frenzy and don't eat enough protein. And that's not good either. But if you're consuming adequate protein and then you're consuming enough dietary fat to provide energy and keep yourself functioning at a higher rate, both physically and mentally, and calories are equated for, then you're going to experience more efficient loss in body fat than you would if you would drop your dietary fat very low.
Yeah, and ketosis is pretty muscle sparing as well, right? So you don't have to go out and eat your body weight, per ounce of, I hear this a lot, like eat for your lean body mass, 1 gram of protein per lean body mass. But some people may not need to eat that much if they are in that deep therapeutic level of ketosis because the muscle sparing effects. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you're trying to lose body fat, then you're not, by definition, your priority is not going to be building muscle, because if you really wanted to optimize for building muscle, you'd be in a caloric surplus, so you have more fuel coming in to build more tissue. If you're going to try and lose body fat and prioritize that, then your goal shifts from building muscle to simply maintaining as much muscle as possible. And yeah, ketones are very anti-catabolic. If you're in a ketogenic state, you're going to be very efficient at retaining all the lean muscle that you've built. I think as far as like a good rule of thumb, as far as the ratio to lean mass that you have, between 0.8 and 1.5 is a pretty good window. There'll be a period in a competition prep where I dip below that intake, but it's a very finite period of time. And it's also in the context of having strategically placed keto caloric refeeds that do have an increase in protein. So I don't always stay at a very low protein intake. I very rarely stay at a low protein intake. I mean, in the off season, in a building phase, I can be consuming, 2 grams of protein per pound of lean mass. So it's very individualized, but I don't want to see people fearful of protein and not eat enough, but I also don't want to see people just overconsume protein, because there is definitely a point of diminishing returns in which your body can't even assimilate it anyways. And it's not going to be the best proponent for energy, because if you're in a fat adapted state, protein is not a very efficient source for energy. It's a derivative for building. It's a building block. I mean, you're getting your amino acids there to build muscle and retain muscle, but you're not going to get your energy there from an efficient standpoint.
Gotcha. So I just listened to you on Sean Baker's MeatRx, which I know they're going to probably put that interview up as well on YouTube. So anyone who wants to go out and search that out and hear a deeper dive of this question, you were talking with Sean about how when you do contest prep that you kind of titrate your protein up and down. Mm-hmm. And then there's a point where you have to drop that protein back and do more of like a fat refeed. Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah. So a lot of people go through like a prep or a cut and they leave protein constant the whole time. But when you're changing your body's caloric intake, when you're changing your body's composition, when you're seeing a fluctuation in metabolism, it makes sense that protein would also fluctuate. I mean, everything is in a state of flux, like nothing is static. And what I like to do is start at a not very low, but relatively low protein intake, and about 80% of my calories coming from fat at maintenance. And then I'll gradually take fat down and increase protein up. And doing that, my calories are dropping because there's more calories per gram of fat than protein. And I can slowly increase that protein intake until I start to experience some adverse effects, what I like to call a protein threshold. So that's going to allow me to figure out and hone in on what that protein threshold for me is. And it's going to be a different number for everybody. For me, it's when my ratio of fat to protein gets closer to about a 1-to-1 ratio, or about 70, 67, somewhere percent of my calories coming from fat. And at that point, I'll start dropping both dietary fat and protein, in which the fat ratio will start to increase because I'll be a little bit more aggressive with that drop in protein. That's going to be pretty aggressive in my caloric drop. And then as I get to the end of that phase, I start introducing ketogenic caloric refeeds, in which, I'll see a 30 or 40 or sometimes even 50% increase in daily calories for that refeed day, all coming from protein and fat sources. No need to have the carb refeed, but that pretty much makes it more sustainable for me to be at that lower caloric intake, that lower protein intake. But I'm having that 1 or 2 day consecutive refeed in which my overall average weekly intake is a little bit higher.
Gotcha. Now, when you start to see adverse effects from, your protein being a little bit too high, what kind of stuff physically does that manifest as?
So I'll see a increase in blood glucose. I'll see a decrease in blood ketones. I'll see a little bit more bloating. I'll see a little bit less mental clarity. My sleep quality will go downhill, and I'll just feel a little bit like more inflammation. My joints hurt a bit more, and I won't recover as quickly from my workouts. And when I reach that point, I'll know that I've kind of hit that threshold. And you want to be sure that you're not just seeing one of those points. I mean, like a lot of females, they'll see, an increase in water retention or bloating during their cycle, and they'll just assume that they've reached their protein threshold. You kind of want to make sure that all the other variables are held constant and that isn't conflicting the feedback. So once several of those conditions start to surface and you can feel that you're just not in an optimal ideal state, then you can rest assured that that's probably a good indicator of your protein threshold, and you can kind of start manipulating from there.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And it's so different for everyone, because I know people probably ask you this all the time: how much protein should I eat and how much fat should I eat? And I'm like, you kind of have to just play around and figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of trial and error in manipulation. I mean, I can see some patterns, surface after working with a lot of people, but there's not a single macro calculator online that's going to be, the best thing for you. Like, you just have to familiarize yourself with your body and have some self-awareness and see how you respond to different manipulations.
Yeah, I think that's, people will come to keto and they're like, okay, let me just use one of these calorie calculators online. And I think that, being in ketosis is a different metabolic state. And I think that we can eat maybe a little bit more quote unquote calories being in a ketotic state. So those and then the calculators aren't going to account for your BMR, your NEAT, your how much you're exercising, any of that stuff. So it's like just going online and trying to figure that stuff out, I think can really mess people up for sure.
Totally. I mean, if you have no idea, then simply tracking for a little while and seeing what you gravitate to naturally, maybe plugging in a calculator and just see kind of what direction it's recommending, and then start somewhere in that general ballpark. But it's going to have to be it's going to boil down to you, tracking, figuring out what your intake is, figuring out how you're responding at that intake, and then seeing how your body, changes and shifts from a composition standpoint, from a strength standpoint, from an energy standpoint. There's so many variables at play. So just having a pulse on all those different variables and controlling for as many of them as you can is the best and only way to really get it dialed in.
Yeah, that's what I had to basically do when I decided. I'm like, all right, I got to figure out how much I actually need to keep my body weight stable. Mm-hmm. And I went through like a 3-week tracking process where I was like, well, I lost 0.6 pounds the first week, so let me try to add a little bit more food. Week 2, then I still lost like 0.4, so I added more weight food week 3, and then it stabilized. I'm like, okay, this average amount over what I had 7 days, I'll deduct 300 from there and see how that works. And it's been working really well. But I plugged in how much someone my height, age, weight would need, and it was actually like dramatically less than what I'm eating. So it's
yeah. A lot of people sell themselves short because they'll plug in a calculator and the calculator will give them, okay, this is your BMR, this is what you should consume. But I mean, if you have any significant amount of lean mass, lean tissue on you, that's going to eat up your metabolic rate. You're going to require more food. So a lot of nuance there. And I don't want to see people eating less than they should. You don't want to obviously overconsume either. I mean, calories definitely matter, but figuring out what your body performs best at is going to be very individualized and is worth the effort and time in figuring out for sure.
Yeah. And, the one thing on this topic, when you do a show, this is what I heard you say with Sean, and I listened to your interview with Scott on Carnivore Cast recently as well. You actually give yourself, isn't it like a couple of years to reverse out once you've dieted down for a show to kind of recover your metabolism?
Yeah, absolutely. So it takes me between 4 and 6 months to diet down for a show. And then it takes another 4 to 6 months to reverse diet out of that show. So that's pretty much a year right there in which I'm not really building any muscle because I'm in a caloric deficit that entire time and or, improving my metabolism in that reverse diet. So that's a whole year in which I'm not really building any significant amount of muscle. And then as a natural athlete, especially when I've been lifting for as long as I have, it takes a long time to put on any significant degree, any noticeable amount of lean tissue. So if I was to do a show every year, I would basically have no time to build any muscle. If I was to do a show every other year, that's only giving myself 1 year to build any muscle. By taking 2 or 3 years off in between shows, I can actually have a solid, legitimate building phase and look noticeably better and improve year to year after I compete.
Wow. I mean, so I want to ask you a question. Like if a woman came to you and she's had, let's say, 20 pounds to lose, she's been doing a ton of chronic dieting, a ton of fasting, and she's just, she's probably having binge days in there. Let's be honest about that. She's probably kind of falling off and having days where she eats a lot more and she's just stuck. What would you immediately say, okay, let's put you into a deficit in order to get the scale moving, or how would you handle that particular client?
So if they've been chronically undereating for any significant amount of time, I would absolutely put them in a reverse diet. I get several female clients that are around, 1,200 calories. That's pretty common. They've come from some other coach. They're around 1,200 calories. They've been at a deficit their entire life and they've plateaued. So I would like to see them get up to at least 2,000 calories. We'll gradually increase them. And again, that's kind of an arbitrary number because some people are going to be different. What a 5'3" individual needs versus what a 5'8" individual needs is going to be different depending on muscle, tissue, et cetera, et cetera. But if they're at 1,200 calories and we increase them up to 2,000 calories, 2,000 calories is a pretty healthy intake for most females, at least from like a maintenance standpoint. They could probably go higher if they want to build muscle tissue. So let's try and get them higher. If they're not seeing any crazy adverse effects, they may experience a little bit of gain in body fat, but that's just something they're going to have to embrace. But get that little gain in body fat, improve your metabolism, improve your hormone function, improve your ability to build more lean tissue, which is in turn going to improve your metabolism, and then spend some significant time at a maintenance or surplus and not worry about trying to lose a whole bunch of weight and look good in a bikini. Focus on their health and longevity. If you have to spend 2 years at a maintenance or surplus, but you've been dieting your whole life and not really getting to where you want to go, if you take those 2 years and actually put in the time it needs to improve your baseline starting point, then when you actually do diet there in the future, you'll be successful. And that 2 years time is nothing. It's minuscule. It's a blip when you look at your whole life and how you're going to set yourself up for success in a sustainable manner.
Yeah, I think that's what's really hard for people is that they've, maybe they have been at that calorie deficit. They've been restricting for that long, and then they're just anxious to get where they want to go. They're still not at goal. They've got, 20 pounds or so they want to lose, and they're not really willing to put in that time of being in that surplus and having to just deal with that. I think that's really, really hard for people to psychologically overcome. How do you handle that in your coaching?
Understand what it is that's happening here. And when you break it down and you become excited about making this a lifelong commitment and not just some drop in the bucket, I want to lose 20 pounds for a wedding photo shoot, then it becomes a real thing that is sustainable. When you have a deeper underlying reason to be healthy and live a longer life filled with, a better health span, it's a lot easier to stay motivated to play that long game. So I would just encourage people to not have this, short-term fix mentality when it comes to it, when it comes to body recomposition. I mean, I'm excited about natural bodybuilding because it's something that I can sustain for the rest of my life. I mean, there's masters divisions. There's I want to be, healthy when I'm 75, 85, 95, 100 years old. And I think that's totally sustainable, totally possible. So when you have that longer game approach, it makes the time fly in a much more efficient manner, and you don't get bogged down in just the anxiety of the short-term fix.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And right now, I mean, I just did a video this morning and it was kind of talking about figuring out my, macros and the 3-week process to actually get to where I wanted to deduct from. And I was like, you guys, what are you in a hurry for? It's 2020.
Yeah.
Where are you going to go?
Yeah.
And you had an experience earlier this year where you were about to go into a show. You had worked so hard and sacrificed the holidays, and then that got canceled. How did you deal with that?
It was very tough. I mean, the show got canceled 1.5 weeks before it was supposed to happen due to the virus. And, you do sacrifice so much. You put in so much energy, so much effort, and to have it just ripped from you, moments before it all comes to fruition, it's debilitating. But I put a lot of emphasis in my stoic thinking. I look at the world around me. I look at what I can control. I look at what I can't control. I can control the things in my direct sphere, and I try to manage and control those to the best of my ability. And then I learn from any hardships or obstacles that come my way. And if I can't control it, it's not worth my brain cells and bandwidth to try and fix if it's out of my control. And I think that's what a lot of people are going through right now with the virus. I mean, there's so many challenges and hardships that we're all faced with on a day-to-day basis, but it makes no sense to allow that to wear you down, beat you down, and become negative and remiss about it. I mean, take that, learn from it, make the most of it, and then live to see another day and be better for it.
Yeah, it's such a great attitude, and just keeping that kind of one day at a time view and not worrying about the stuff you can't control. I mean, there's been a lot of, I feel like for some of us, there's been blessings that have come out of this whole pandemic thing, taking
Absolutely.
my daughter keto, and that was something I wanted to do it, but it was like, we're all home now. And so we might as well do it. And then somebody from your team happened to reach out to me like that same week I had made the decision, just to like, hey, you want to try some of these? And I was like, well, why the heck not? So it all kind of worked out, and we don't know what the future's what's going to happen, but if we can feel good in our own bodies and live our best lives in that regard, then, I think we can handle what's coming.
100%. That's why I'm so passionate and just like feel very blessed to be in the keto carnivore space. I mean, when you look at the nutrition, the training, the lifestyle as a whole, I mean, it just improves every other facet of your life. Everything, it works in a symbiotic relationship, and everything improves. And when you see that, when you recognize that, you become excited about all little nuanced details, all little things that you can shift and tweak and manipulate to be 1% better the next day. And I feel like that's really illustrated great in the keto carnivore space, the community, and what's in the present moment and what's beyond. I mean, it's all something to be excited about.
Absolutely. I want to ask you one question about your experience. You did natural bodybuilding without keto, and then you switched to keto. What was the difference between those two phases?
There's a lot of differences. So I had struggled with eating disorders, binge eating, purge eating, or binging and purging, and just very unhealthy relationships with food in the pre-keto days. I also had a very unhealthy off season. I put on a ton of weight and unnecessary body fat. And then I would just have to work really hard and pretty much starve myself and just do endless cardio to lean down and be show ready in the pan or on show day. With the carbohydrate based approach. And I did a lot of things wrong. I've learned a lot since then in the sport of bodybuilding, but taking a ketogenic approach, I'm not ruled by my food. I mean, I don't have to eat 6 or 7 meals a day like I did previously. I can eat once or twice and then focus on the other areas of my life that need my attention. My mental clarity and cognition is just so much better than it was when I was fueled by carbohydrates. I mean, I've got a much more even keel, consistent energy flow, and my productivity is through the roof, and my training is much better because my recovery time is much less. So I can train with greater frequency. I can maintain the muscle that I've built because ketones are very anti-catabolic, and I just feel and function at a much higher level than I ever did when I was using a carbohydrate-based approach. And just like the final package as well, like everybody that I was on stage against does a traditional bro dieting approach or flexible dieting if it fits your macros. I was definitely the only ketogenic competitor on that stage, but I looked just significantly better than all of them. I mean, I had more vascularity. I had a thinner skin. My muscles popped more. I mean, everything was just much more appealing from a judge's perspective in the sport of bodybuilding. And like when I saw that and I combined that with just the whole experience as it all related to one another, and just how much more sustainable and enjoyable it was like there's no point in going back to what I'd done before. So I have no intentions of going back to the carb-based protocol.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I feel like so many of us feel that way. And for me, when I knew I needed to switch some things up, I knew I wanted to stay within a ketogenic approach.
Mm-hmm.
Even though my hormones were having issues, I realized, thank God, I wasn't like, oh, let me go out and eat some carbs. But I realized that the problems I was having was due to eating too much protein, too much gluconeogenesis. It was too stressful for my body. And then all the extended fasting I was trying to do. And it was like, no, if you just eat more and up your fats, stop fasting and stop stressing out your body, everything will go back. And it was like, I got my cycle back within 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
of quitting all fasting and upping that fat. And I know people that have gone back to carbs, it's taken them 3 or 4 months to, and I'm like, well, I just did that in 2 weeks and it's been consistent ever since. And so, for me, I don't know about you, but carbs, I had a lifelong history of depression and anxiety and was on several medications to manage those conditions. And it's like, if I have enough fat, if I'm doing this way of eating, I don't have to even worry about that at all. It's like, it's not even an issue. So it's just such a better way to live your life.
Totally. I mean, I used to not allow myself to go through the bakery section of the grocery store because my cravings would be so intense. Now I don't even yearn for that food. I don't care because the feeling of just utmost efficiency and optimization with the protocol that I'm implementing now enticing to me than that high that I would get from the carbohydrates. So it's not even a worthwhile trade-off. Like, this just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's definitely not worth it at all. Well, so I want to talk a little bit about you guys now. You have your compound, the Keto Brick compound. You guys have made a lot of changes with your business, and tell me a little bit about what you're doing now and what's going on with all that.
Yeah, so we're currently in 3 small warehouse buildings, and we just purchased it used to be an old grocery store up in Northwest Arkansas, but the grocery store is literally 3 times bigger or 2 times bigger than the 3 buildings we have now. So it's just a significant increase in size and space, and we're going to take a year to totally renovate and revamp that building, and then get it all built up to spec with our standards and what our needs are. And then it's going to be amazing. Like, the gym is going to be there. The Keto Brick kitchen is going to be there. I'm going to have a podcast studio that's just massive. And then I'm going to fly out guests and have them all, record with me in person. It's just going to be a whole nother level of compound. And I'm super, super excited about it.
That's just so exciting. Yeah, it's fun to watch. So you guys are kind of like living in a warehouse right now too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. We started the business in our little bitty apartment in Northwest Arkansas. I mean, totally broke, and we did everything wrong. A lot of sleepless nights, and then from there, we started leasing out this commercial kitchen space in Little Rock, and we would drive 3 hours one way, stay up all night making these bricks, then drive 3 hours back, and it was just not efficient, and it was just not productive at all. And then we got this building that we're in now. We're leasing it. We had a 3-year lease on this. We've got 1 more year left of that lease, and then we're gonna move everybody up, the whole crew, and relocate up in Northwest Arkansas in that new building.
That's exciting. Cool. Well, I'll definitely be watching, and I'm excited to watch your podcast and everything transform. I already love your podcast and your YouTube channel. You have such a great foundation already. It's going to be really awesome to watch all of that grow and see how many people you guys are able to help. It's really cool to watch.
Well, I definitely appreciate you watching and the support. I mean, the fact that you take the time to support us, I mean, that means more than you can imagine. I appreciate it.
Oh, you got it. And I'll make sure to put all of your links below this video so everyone can follow you on social media, your YouTube, your podcast, Keto Brick website, everything. I'll include it all below so everybody watching will know how to find you and support you guys.
Well, thank you very, very much. I truly do appreciate it. And let's reschedule our time for you to come on to my podcast. I'd love to get you on the show.
Oh, I would love that. Absolutely. That would be a huge honor. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Consider it done.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot again. And again, I'll make sure to put everything below the video so everyone can find you.